The dust hung thick in the air like a shroud over the sun-baked street of Eldridge, a forgotten speck on the edge of the Wyoming Territory. It swirled in lazy eddies around the boots of passers-by who trudged past without their faces etched with the same weary indifference as the cracked wooden facades of the saloons and mercantiles lining the way. In the midst of it all, Clara huddled against the splintered post of the livery stable, her arms wrapped tight around her youngest, a boy no more than 2, whose sobs rattled through his frail body like dry leaves in the wind. The child's cries pierced the afternoon haze, sharp and unrelenting, but the world moved on, a ranch hand spitting tobacco into the dirt, a woman in a faded calico dress hurrying her own brood toward the general store, a teamster cracking his whip over a pair of mules, without so much. Clara's throat burned from the grit, her eyes stinging not just from the dust, but from the hot tears she swallowed back. Her other 5 children clustered around her skirts, the eldest girl 8 years old clutching the hands of her siblings, their faces smeared with the same exhaustion that weighed on Clara's bones. They had walked the last miles after the wagon axle snapped, leaving their meager belongings scattered in the sagebrush miles back. Her husband, oh, not husband anymore, not after the note he'd left pinned to the cabin door 3 weeks past, scrawled in his hasty hand, gone to California. "Can't take the lot of you." The words echoed in her skull, a dull ache that matched a blister on her heel and the emptiness gnawing at her gut. They'd been scraping by on the homestead, but now with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few coins sewn into her hem, the frontier stretched out indifferent, vast, and unforgiving as the sky above. The boy's cries grew hoarse, his small fists clenching her bodice, soaking it with snot and tears. Clara rocked him gently, her own body trembling from the effort to hold steady. The other children whimpered softly, the twins 4 years each, rubbing their eyes, the 6-year-old boy kicking at a pebble, the 7-year-old girl staring blankly at the horizon, as if willing their father to ride back from it. But no one came. The street's rhythm continued the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of cattle in a distant pen, the murmur of voices from the saloon where men drowned their own miseries in whiskey. Clara felt the weight of it all pressing down, the isolation wrapping around her like the cold nights they'd endured under the stars, huddling for warmth. Her mind flickered to the life before the green hills of Ohio, the promise of land out west that had lured them here. But that was gone, eroded like the riverbanks after a flood. A shadow fell across them, long and lean, blocking the sun's glare. Clara looked up, her heart stuttering. A man stood there, his silhouette framed by the light dust motes dancing around his wide-brimmed hat. He was tall, weathered, with a coat frayed at the cuffs and boots caked in the red earth of the trails. His eyes shadowed beneath the brim, fixed on the crying boy, then shifted to Clara, holding her gaze with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't speak at first, just crouched down slow, like approaching a skittish colt, and extended a calloused hand toward the child. "Easy now, little one," he murmured, his voice low and rough as gravel, but laced with a gentleness that surprised her. The boy hiccuped, his sobs faltering as the man pulled a worn handkerchief from his pocket, dabbing at the child's face with careful strokes. The other children watched wide-eyed, silent for the first time in hours. Clara's arms tightened instinctively, but something in the man's posture, the way he didn't loom, didn't demand, eased the knot in her chest just a fraction. He straightened, tipping his hat back, slightly revealing a face lined by sun and sorrow, a scar tracing his jaw like a river on a map. "Name's Harlan," he said, not to her, but to the boy who peered up at him with watery eyes. Then, to Clara, "Looks like you've had a rough go. Ain't no place for young uns to be crying in the street." His words hung there, simple, without pity or judgment, but they cracked something open in her, a floodgate she'd been holding shut. She nodded, her voice barely. "Wagon broke. Husband. Left." The admission tasted like ash, but saying it aloud made the burden shift, if only a hair. Harlan glanced down the street, then back at the children, his jaw tightening. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small pouch, and shook out a few hard candies wrapped in waxed paper treasures from some distant supply run. He handed them out one by one, the children's grubby hands accepting them with hesitant wonder. The youngest took the cries fading to sniffles as he sucked on the sweetness. "Come on," Harlan said, standing and offering his hand to Clara. "My spread's a few miles out. Got room in the barn at least for tonight. Can't leave you here like this." She hesitated, the weight of strangers' kindness a foreign thing in this harsh land. But the children's eyes on her hopeful now, and the ache in her limbs decided it. She took his hand rough and steady and rose. As they followed him to his horse, the dust settling behind them, Clara felt the first stir of something unnamed, not hope, not yet, but the absence of utter despair. The frontier watched on, indifferent as ever, but for once it had sent a reprieve. What would you do in this story? Comment below on Romance Trails, Wild West. The barn smelled of old hay and horse sweat, a close living scent that wrapped around them as Harlan swung the wide doors open. Moonlight slanted through the gaps in the planks, striping the dirt floor in silver. Clara carried the youngest on her hip, while the others trailed behind their small shoes, scuffing softly. The children's eyes were wide, taking in the shadowed rafters, the ladder to the loft, a row of empty stalls, where only one held a bay mare chewing quietly. Harlan lit a lantern, the flame catching slow on the wick, spreading a warm circle of light. "Ain't much," he said, almost to himself, "but it's dry and the wind don't cut through." He spread 2 horse blankets over a thick bed of straw in the corner farthest from the door. "You take this. I'll sleep by the tack room." Clara set the boy down. He toddled a step, then sat hard, staring at the lantern as though it were a new sun. The older girls began to unfold their shawls, making nests for the little ones. Harlan watched a moment, then turned away, busying himself with a tin pail and a dipper. He brought water from the pump outside, cool and tasting faintly of iron. When he handed the dipper to the 7-year-old girl, she drank in small, careful sips, eyes never leaving his face. They ate what little Harlan had on hand: cold cornbread, a wedge of hard, cheese-dried apples from a sack he kept hung high against mice. The children ate slowly, as though afraid the food might vanish. Clara broke pieces with trembling fingers, passing them down the line. Harlan sat on an overturned crate across from her, elbows on his knees, saying nothing unless one of the children asked a question in their thin voices. "Where's your ma?" the 6-year-old boy asked, once crumbs on his lip. Harlan's gaze drifted to the dark beyond the lantern. "Gone a long time," he answered. "Same as your pay, I reckon." The boy nodded solemnly, accepting the symmetry of loss the way children sometimes do. Clara felt a pang, sharp and unexpected. She looked at Harlan's hands, broad scarred knuckles thickened from years of rope and rain, and wondered what else those hands had held and lost. Night deepened. The children slept in a pile, limbs tangled, breathing, soft and even. Clara could not close her eyes. She sat with her back against a post, knees drawn up, listening to the marsh shift in her stall and the wind worrying the eaves. Harlan had moved to the far side of the barn, stretched out on his own blanket with his hat over his face, but she knew he wasn't sleeping either. The silence between them felt alive, heavy with things unsaid. After a while, he spoke, voice low, so as not to wake. "You got a place you're trying to get to?" She shook her head. "Nowhere left." He was quiet, a long beat. "Folks round here don't take kindly to women alone with young uns. They'll talk. Some'll offer help, most'll just watch you fall." "I know," she said. Another pause. "I ain't offering charity, but I got 40 acres of cabin, needs chink in a garden gone to weeds. Works, honest, room for 6 more if they don't mind close quarters." Clara's throat tightened. She looked at the sleeping faces of her, the way the lantern light gilded their lashes, the smudges of dirt still on their cheeks. Then she looked at Harlan. His hat was pushed back. In the dim glow, she saw the faint tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes held hers without flinching. "Why?" she asked. He rubbed a thumb along the scar on his chin. "Had a wife once. 2 girls. Fever. Took 'em all in winter. been rattling around this place alone ever since? Figure maybe the quiet's had its turn. The words landed soft like snow. Clara felt something loosen inside her chest, a knot she hadn't known was there. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over and touched the youngest boy's hair, feeling the warmth of his scalp under her palm. "I don't know how to trust again," she said finally. "Neither do I," Harlan replied. "But I reckon we can learn the same as we learn anything else. One day at a—" She let the silence settle between them again, softer now. Outside, coyote yipped once sharp and distant. The mare blew through her nostrils. Somewhere in the loft, a barn owl stirred its wings. Clara exhaled, long and slow. "We'll stay," she said. "For a while." Harlan nodded once the smallest motion. Then he pulled his hat down over his eyes again, but she saw the corner of his mouth lift, just a fraction before the shadow hit it. Morning would come soon enough with its chores and its hard light and its thousand small tests. For now, though, the barn held them all, the 6 children breathing in sleep, the man who had stepped forward when no one else would, and the woman who against every instinct had chosen to stay. The days blurred into a rhythm Clara had forgotten existed. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of light that made every breath visible. Harlan rose first, always his boots scraping the cabin floorboards as he built the fire. By the time Clara stirred the children, coffee was already boiling its bitter smell, cutting through the frost that clung to the windows. She learned the place in pieces. The cabin was small, 2 rooms, and a lean-to-kitchen walls of squared logs chinked with clay that had cracked in places over the years. Harlan had patched what he could, but the wind still found the gaps and whistled through like a low complaint. Outside, 40 acres rolled away in gentle swells of bunchgrass and sage, cut by a shallow creek that ran clear most seasons. A few head of longhorn cattle grazed the far ridge, and a milk cow named Bess stood patient in the pole corral. There was no orchard, no flower patch, only the stubborn garden Harlan had let go to seed after his wife died. Clara started with the simplest things. She swept the floors, scrubbed the blackened cookpot, shook out the quilts stiff with dust. The children helped in their small, earnest ways. The 8-year-old girl carried kindling, the twins chased each other through the drying grass until their cheeks burned red. The 6-year-old boy followed Harlan like a shadow, asking endless questions about the mare's shoes or the way a fence post should sit true in the ground. Harlan answered patiently, never once raising his voice. He showed the boy how to hold a hammer, how to drive a nail without bending it. When the child missed and smashed his thumb, Harlan knelt, took the small hand in his own, and blew on it until the tears stopped. Clara watched from the doorway, a dishcloth forgotten in her fist, and felt something shift inside her, something warm and dangerous. One afternoon, she found him at the garden plot behind the cabin on his knees, turning soil with a broken spade. The earth was hard-packed tight from neglect, but he worked it anyway, breaking clods with steady strokes. She came closer, skirts brushing the dead stalks of last year's corn. "You kept it going all this time?" she asked. He paused, resting his forearm on the spade handle. "Tried. Some years, the seed came up. Most years, it didn't." He glanced at her, figured it was worth the try again. She crouched beside him, pushed her sleeves to her elbows, and sank her fingers into the dirt. It was cold, gritty, full of small stones. She worked a handful loose, felt the texture give under her nails. For the first time since Ohio, she smelled something besides dust and despair, something alive, dark, and promising. They planted what they had, a few shriveled potatoes Harlan had saved in the root cellar, carrot seeds. So old, the packet was soft at the edges, beans she'd carried in a tin from the broken wagon. The children helped poking holes with sticks, dropping seeds with grave ceremony. When they finished, Harlan brought a bucket from the creek and poured it slowly over the rows. The water sank in dark patches, disappearing into the earth like a secret kept. Evenings were quieter. After supper, usually beans or cornbread or whatever small game Harlan brought in, they sat by the fire. The children told stories of their father of the wagon journey of nights when coyotes sounded close enough to touch. Harlan listened, nodding, sometimes adding a word or two about his own girls. How the eldest had loved to sing hymns off key, how the youngest had collected smooth river stones and lined them along the windowsill. One night, the youngest boy climbed into Harlan's lap without asking. Harlan went still, then slowly wrapped an arm around the child, holding him the way a man holds something fragile he's afraid of breaking. Clara watched the firelight move across their faces, Harlan's lined and careful, the boy's soft and trusting, and felt her throat close. Later, when the children were asleep on pallets near the hearth, she stepped outside. The sky was thick with stars, so many they seemed to press down. Harlan followed after a minute, stopping a respectful distance away. "You're doing good with them," he said. "They're tough," she answered. "Had to be." He looked out across the dark pasture. "I used to think tough was enough. Turns out it ain't." She turned to him. "What is then?" He took a long breath. "Letting somebody stay. Letting somebody see the soft parts you've been hiding," the words hung between them. Clara felt the night air move against her skin, cool and alive. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint pine resin on his coat, the smoke from the fire that clung to him. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." Neither moved for a long moment. Then she reached out tentative and laid her palm against his chest. His heart beat steady under the wool, strong and unafraid. He covered her hand with his own rough fingers curling gently around hers. They stood like that until the cold drove them back inside, but the touch lingered quiet and certain, like the first green shoot breaking through winter ground. The first real trouble came with the letter. It arrived on a Thursday in late spring, carried by a boy no older than 12 who rode up the track on a sway-backed pony. The envelope was thick cream paper, sealed with red wax, stamped with the initials of Clara's brother-in-law back in Ohio. Harlan took it from the boy's hand, paid him a nickel, and watched him gallop off before handing the letter to Clara without a word. She broke the seal at the kitchen table while the children played outside, their laughter drifting through the open door like birdsong. The handwriting was her sister's neat, slanted, careful. The words were not. "Thomas is dead. Drowned, crossing the Platte last fall. Left debts we can't cover. The house has gone to auction, but there's a small inheritance if you come back. Enough to start over proper. Bring the children. We'll raise them right. You belong here, Clara. Not out there with strangers." Clara read it twice, then folded the paper into smaller and smaller squares until it fit in her palm. She sat motionless until the ink of the words blurred behind her eyes. Harlan came in from the porch, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw her face. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. She pushed the letter across the table. He read it, standing, expression unchanging, then set it down again. "You thinking of going?" he said. "I don't know what I'm thinking." He nodded once, slow. "Fair enough." That night, the cabin felt smaller. The children sensed it. They were quieter at supper, picking at their beans. After they were asleep, Clara stepped onto the porch. The air was soft-smelling of new grass and creek water. Harlan joined her, leaning on the rail, a careful arm's length away. "I keep seeing it," she said. "A real house. School for the older ones. A church pew on Sunday. No more worrying if the cow will freshen or if the roof will hold another winter." Harlan looked out at the dark pasture. "Sounds safe." "It is."
Safe ain't the same as alive.
She turned to him. "You think I'm not alive here? I think you're fighting to be every day. And you're winning, but winning ain't easy, and it don't look like the pictures in a ladies' magazine." Her throat worked. "They're offering to take the children if I can't manage. Say I'm selfish, keeping them out here." Harlan's jaw tightened, the scar along it, pulling white in the moonlight. "They ever offer to come fetch you, send money right before now?" "No." "Then they're buying peace of mind, not helping you." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm scared I'll ruin them. That they'll grow up hard and bitter because I chose wrong. He stepped closer, then close enough she could feel the warmth off him. You think I ain't scared every damn day that I don't wake up wondering if I'm enough for any of you, but I look at that little one climbing into my lap or your girl reading the almanac like it's scripture, and I figure maybe being scared together is better than being safe apart. Claire's eyes burned. She looked up at him, searching his face in the faint starlight. You'd let me go, I'd hate every mile of it, he said. But I wouldn't hold you. Not if you wanted to. She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve, then curling into the wool. I don't want to leave. He exhaled a rough sound and pulled her against him. She pressed her face to his chest, listening to the steady thud of his heart. His arms came around her, careful at first, then firmer, as though he'd been waiting years to hold someone and not break them. They stood like that until the night grew colder, until the coyotes started their chorus far off in the hills. When they went back inside, Harlan banked the fire low, and Clara checked each sleeping child, smoothing a blanket here, tucking a stray lock of hair there. She paused longest over the youngest, whose small hand clutched the river stone he'd found weeks ago, and now carried. In the morning, she burned the letter in the cook stove. The paper curled black, then ash, and she watched it, until nothing remained but a faint gray smear on the iron. Harlan came in from. Neither spoke of the letter again. Instead, she poured coffee for them both. And when their fingers touched over the tin cup, they let the touch linger. Outside, the children ran through the new green, shouting free. The garden rows showed tiny spears of green pushing through the soil. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its rising, falling song, 2 notes of pure promise. Clara stepped to the doorway and watched them, felt the weight of choice settle, not as burden, but as ground beneath her feet. Solid. Hers. The summer arrived in a slow burn, turning the grass gold and the creek to a thin silver thread between cracked banks. The garden rewarded their patience. Carrots thinned to straight orange fingers. Beans climbed the poles Harlan had driven. Deep potatoes swelled beneath the soil like hidden promises. Clara worked the rows in the early mornings, while the air still held a ghost of coolness, her hands brown and calloused, now nails edged with black earth. The children ran barefoot, soles toughened to leather, their laughter ringing off the cabin walls. Harlan taught them all the small necessary things: how to read a sky for rain, how to set a snare without cruelty, how to sharpen a knife so it sang against the wet stone. He showed the 8-year-old girl the old family Bible he kept wrapped in oilcloth under his bed pages, yellowed edges soft from years of turning. She traced the names written in faded ink: his mother, his wife, his 2 girls. When she asked why there was no space after his own name, he only said some books ain't finished yet, and closed it gently. Clara watched these moments from the doorway or the garden's edge, feeling the slow knitting of something between. She and Harlan spoke more in silences than words now. A shared glance across the supper table when the youngest boy said grace without prompting. The way Harlan's hand would rest a second longer on her shoulder when he passed behind her. The nights they sat on the porch after the children slept, coffee cooling between them, talking of nothing and everything: the price of beef in Cheyenne, the way the stars seemed closer here than anywhere else, the dreams each had buried long before they met. One evening in August, thunder muttered far off in the mountains. The sky turned bruise purple, heavy with unshed rain. Clara was mending a tear in the youngest shirt by lamplight when Harlan came in from checking the stock rain already dark on his hat brim. He hung the hat on its peg, shook water from his coat, and stood looking at her a long moment. Clara, he said, voice rougher than usual. She set the needle. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt in front of her chair so their eyes were level. His hands, those broad, scarred hands, took hers, turned them palm up, studied the new lines etched there by hoe and rope and time. I ain't a man of pretty words, he began. Never was. But I've been thinking on this a while. On you. On them, kids sleeping in there like they belong. On this place not feeling empty anymore. He swallowed. I want to marry you. Proper. in front of God and whoever else cares to watch. Not because you need a roof or I need, because I love you. And because I can't picture another season without you in it. Clara felt the air leave her lungs in a soft rush. She looked down at their joined hands, hers smaller, his enveloping, and saw the tremor in his fingers, the same tremor she felt in her own chest. I'm not the girl I was, she whispered. I come with 6 children, and more ghosts than I can count. I know who you are, he said. Every hard piece and every soft one. I want all of it. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and silent. She lifted one hand to his face, traced the scar along his, felt the rough stubble under her thumb. Yes, she said. The word was small, but it filled the room. Harlan exhaled, bowed his head until his forehead rested against hers. They stayed like that until the first hard drops struck the tin roof, until the thunder rolled closer and lightning lit the windows white. The next morning, the rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean. Harlan rode into Eldridge alone and returned by noon with the circuit preacher, a thin man with wire spectacles and a Bible worn to threads. They gathered everyone on the porch, the children scrubbed and solemn in their best, which was little more than the milk cow watching from the corral, the meadowlark still singing from the fence post. The preacher spoke plain words about covenant and endurance. Harlan and Clara stood facing each other, hands clasped. When he slid a plain gold band onto her finger bought with the last of the season's calf money, it felt cool against her skin, then warm as though it recognized her. Afterward, the children whooped and ran circles around them. The preacher stayed for supper, venison stew, thickened, with garden carrots, biscuits light, as promised. When he left at dusk, Harlan walked him to the gate, came back and found Clara standing alone on the porch ring, catching the